Welcome along to episode 59 of Commentators Corner, and I've got the man behind the epic sim racing league platform that is known as GridFinder. Welcome, Tom Bunten. Good to see you, buddy. It's been a while since Dortmund last October, but things have been really ramping up for you guys. How are things? I mean, you must be busy as hell now. You're in contact with the legend that is Mr. Rafa Martinez as well. Now that you guys have joined the Rafa family.
Um, Hello. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a really busy time. Um, it's been very exciting. Obviously, these things don't happen overnight. GridFinder being acquired by a larger group was never part of our plans. So yeah, it's been a transitional time, a busy time, exciting time. I'm glad that the news is out now because you can imagine these things take months and months and months to cook up. So it wasn't like an overnight thing towards the end of January. It was something that we'd been working on since the previous August September time, as part of an investment round that we were doing for GridFinder, which in itself is a strange concept because when I started GridFinder, I didn't really have any ambition or understanding
Mm.
of the tech world. I didn't really think that's where we were headed. That's what we were going to be doing. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what a startup was. Certainly didn't know what an investment round was. And yeah, now we've been acquired as a direct result of raising a 1.5 million pound seed round. It's called an investment round to grow the platform. So I've had to do a lot of learning, a lot of YouTubing, a lot of Googling. I've read a couple of startup books so I can try and wangle my way through this process. But yeah, it's been intense.
Now, for those that don't know about Tom, when I first met him, you were in the latter stages of your Royal Navy career because I still remember you telling me the story that you went to the Army recruitment agency. The recruitment officer wasn't there, so you went to the Royal Navy. They said, "You fancy flying some Harrier jets?" And you thought that'd be a lot of fun. And now here you are, very much immersed within the sim racing world. When it comes to Royal Navy life, how much of that are you able to implement into your day-to-day workings as a founder and the CEO of GridFinder?
Well, no wonder you're such a celebrated commentator, Alex, because your memory is incredible. God knows when I told you that story, but it's totally true. Yeah, I went to at school. I wasn't particularly academic. I was a library prefect. I was one of the cool guys in year 8, but the
Hmm.
positions didn't open until year 9. But I was like, nah, I want to get in early. I want to get my first foot on the ladder of responsibility for whatever reason. And then ended up being head boy and took it far too seriously and ended up failing basically all of my exams because I was in my head running the place, you know.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, at some point I was off to go and study law. I can't remember why. And I had a bit of a early life crisis and realised, well, I know nothing about law. Why the hell am I about to go and spend 3, 4, 5 years of my life studying something that I've got absolutely no clue what it's about or why I want to do it? So I had an early life crisis, bunked out of sixth form, drove to the careers office in my 1996 zero point 0.9 litre silver and rust Fiat Punto to join the army because I'd been in the army cadets and I'd loved it.
Hmm.
Um, and when I got there, I didn't call ahead. When I got there, the receptionist at the front said, "Well, the army recruiting officer isn't in today," but the guy stood next to her. Was in a naval uniform. And was like, "Why do you want to join the army anyway? Join the navy, be a jump jet pilot." And I was like, "Hell yeah, let's do that!" So we went in, had a chat. I filled out some forms, and then that was it. And then, very long story short, I joined the Navy as a pilot. Managed to get a few weeks of flying training in, which was insane. And then they sold all the jump jets, so I ended up. They were like, you can either leave or you can drive warships. So I decided to do that. So then I ended up training on an aircraft carrier in Norway, and then mine hunters out in the Middle East and Yemen, and then eventually ended up driving a frigate out in the South Indian Ocean and the Caribbean doing drugs busts and all sorts. And then um, I was selected for command in 2015 after our Operation Sophia involvement, which was the refugee crisis off of the coast of Syria. Um, So I was captain of my own ship, which was based in Newcastle, where I'm based now, and I fell in love with Newcastle. Decided never to leave Newcastle and instead leave the Navy. And I was converting my warship driving license to a civilian ship driving license to go and do super yachts. And COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
Actually finished my exams, did my own exams, got my license to drive civilian ships. And yeah, like a lot of people, everything was put on hold during COVID. Now, in that 10-year period of being in the military, right at the start during basic training, there was a rec room, and it had a TV with one console as an Xbox and one game, and it was F1 2011. And I played it as a bit of respite. It was out of the way in the corner of the base camp. You could get there for a couple of hours in the afternoon. Well, evening, late evening, actually. And I got totally hooked. And I'd never liked motorsport before.
Mm-hmm.
I never got it. I never understood it. I used to go and watch the F1 at my granddad's house as a kid, listening to iconic, Murray Walker commentary and watching Raikkonen and Schumacher, racing. And what now to me is like, well, that was the pinnacle of racing. I would love to go back and live that again for the first time. But at the time, I was like, boring. It's just cars going around in circles. I don't get it. Which is sacrilege, really. I'm ashamed to admit that. But then in 2011, I played the F1 game, and I started to understand racing. You go around the track in the car, and you'd understand that Pouon is totally different to Eau Rouge, which is different to Maggots and Beckett's, and you realise that these corners on the tracks, they're not just bendy bits of tarmac, they're characters in their own right, and these characters play a huge part of the story, and those characters change based on how many times the tyres have been over them, or whether it's wet or dry or cold or hot, and these characters are multifaceted, and I got totally fascinated by the concept of racing and strategies, and anyway. So COVID hit 10 years later, and I revisited my love for the F1 game, and it would have been F1 2019, I guess. And I joined my first racing league. I decided that I had a load of time on my hand. I was like, there must be somewhere online where people play this, like not in online random lobbies. And I remember I joined, the first one was Grant Racing League. I don't think it exists anymore. Just like a lot of these leagues, it was a group of friends, 20 or 30 people, maybe 50, 60 at its pinnacle. And used to race on whatever it was, a Thursday or a Friday night. And I got totally hooked by racing with the same people each week and being part of this intricate weaving of storylines between all the different people in this league racing against each other week after week, and building up rivalries and friendships, and starting to speak to each other mid-race, so that when you overtook somebody online, it meant something. You were racing against friends now. Anyway, I had to leave that for whatever reason. Couldn't do that night anymore. So I went to try and find another league to join, and found it very difficult to search for leagues. You go onto Facebook or Google and type in, you'd look for leagues, and you'd find one, you'd be like, perfect, I'm going to join it. And then you'd get into the Discord, you'd go through their process, and you realize that I'm on PlayStation and they're on Xbox. Okay, bugger, well, I'll back out.
Yep.
Go for the next one. Like, they're on PlayStation 2. Amazing. But they're based in Australia, and it's, the races are at 4 a.m. So anyway, yeah, that's the story of the transition, I guess. Circumstantial. And that was the birth of GridFinder as a concept, as an idea. I want to solve this problem of not being able to find communities, which is how GridFinder started, and obviously it's grown arms and legs since, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But to answer your question, how much of what I did in the Navy translates across to what I'm doing now? Totally one for one.
Mm-hmm.
Totally one for one. I actually went to my first veterans dinner a couple of weeks ago in Portsmouth, and it was like a captain. It was called what was it called? It was called the onshore patrol dinner or something. It was all the captains of people that had been on kind of like onshore patrol vessels, or near shore, inshore. Anyway, God, you forget it quickly, don't you?
Yeah, especially
anyway,
when you got a lot on your mind as well on the day-to-day running of GridFinder these days.
Yeah, I know.
Which you don't need to apologise for at all, Tom.
Yeah, totally context shifting back to out of the email inbox and into the memory archives. But yeah, I went back to one of these dinners and was sat on a table. I only knew one other person at that particular table. I knew a lot of people at the event from the Navy's quite a small organization, so that was a fun night. But anyway, somebody asked me after we'd gone around and everyone had kind of done their intros, and I'd mentioned that I was doing something totally different. I was doing a gaming startup, and I was kind of getting into the tech startup world, and blah 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 blah. And we had a small team of 9 people working on the project, and we all based in Newcastle except for Chris, who's obviously in Ohio, Matt, who's in Leeds. Everyone else, we all work from the office. And somebody said, "How did you get into that? Because where did you didn't go to university and learn business? What did you study when you left the Navy?" I said, "Well, no, not really. And actually, the studying happened whilst I was in the Navy without really knowing it. If you're in the military, I suppose particularly as an officer, but also as what in the Navy what we'd call a senior rate, somebody who's been in long enough to do a bit of leadership, to have some leadership roles. You learn how to manage people and how to overcome challenges, and problem solving is what you do all day, every day. And you learn how to find the positives in situations, and all of these things are totally relevant in the startup world, more so than anything you'll find in any book. A lot of people have good ideas. Like, I've got a good idea for a company or a startup or an idea or a product, whatever it is. I think, well, yeah, I can sell it for this much, or I can build the platform for these people, and blah blah blah, and that's fine. But something that's often overlooked when you're starting your own business is that first and foremost, as the founder of a business, you're the leader of a group of people, and um, you need to acknowledge that, and you need to continually strive to improve your skill set in that space. It's not easy. It's certainly not easy. And there was obviously some huge differences between the military and running a tech startup. In the military, everyone is wearing uniform, and they wear a certain number of gold bars on their chest based on how senior they are and how much authority they have. There is a very strict hierarchy. People below you call you sir, and you call those above you sir or ma'am, and it's all very regimented. In the startup world, we rock up. Well, I don't not everywhere, but at GridFinder, people turn up to the office when they want, they leave when they want, they wear what they want, and as long as they're producing the output that we've all agreed to, everyone is fine, and it's a very supportive, collaborative space. But actually, the lessons that you learn in the military are so totally relevant to running a team. And it's often the hardest bit to pick up for those who haven't got any kind of leadership or management experience. And leadership and management, two very different things. But I mean, that's a whole separate podcast. But yeah, I felt very lucky that what ended up being my passion project
Hmm.
turned startup was so well supported by the experience that I had accrued, which on the face of it might have seemed totally irrelevant. Like, what's driving a ship got to do with running a gaming business? And
Hmm.
actually, quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's quite an in-depth answer on that front, Tom. I mean, now,
Yeah, sorry, that was about 10 minutes.
hey, don't worry, don't worry. That's actually really. I like people telling their own stories, and we all have stories to tell. We all have had different journeys that have led us basically to the same place. Of course, for those that do know, I was actually one of the first people on GridFinder's invitational events all those years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah,
and I've
yeah.
been a guest on the Sim Sundays podcast powered by Aztec Sim Sports a couple of times now. I think, well, the first time I think I actually made an appearance was when it was the final day of the 2022 ADAC Sim Racing Expo,
Yes.
whereby it was you, me, Chris Hunnable, all walking just by the paddock area where all the booths had been set up, and it was the final day. And yeah, I mentioned about the exhibitor party the night before.
Mm,
The less said
yeah.
about that, the better for some individuals. Danny Juicy, you have been warned.
Mhm.
But now we take a look at where GridFinder is now. Over 3,000 leagues, over 500,000 sim racers use the service. You also provide the opportunity for people to look for broadcasters, for commentators, and you've also backed a few series such as the Enduro KA Winter Sim series, uh, which is also alongside MSVT, Positive Perception, and Burton Power. I know Andy Burton very well because of my dealings with Rye House Pro Kart, and managed to get the opportunity Funnily enough, it was a weekend in Belgium. I was at Karting Genk and I was in my hotel room and I was commentating alongside Adam Weller, and I think it was Brands Hatch Indy, if I remember correctly, which was, I
Mm.
think, the longest race of the season. But our good friend Mike Yao, the Swiss Army broadcasting Swiss Army knife, who's been doing so well behind the scenes, said, "Oh, are you available?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I can jump on board." But looking at where it is now, um, at this point, Tom, it really just goes to show that hard work, dedication, a great team behind the scenes like Nikhil, Chris, me and Chris get on like a house on fire. We've had multiple great conversations. I was really happy that we were able to do that over a few beverages at the Saturday night party just off of the Dortmund Messe last October. It really just goes to show that GridFinder is going from strength to strength, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of the way I think of it is it's been a 3 year learning curve and
Mm.
full of experiments, full of tests. We've tried things that worked, we've tried other things that haven't worked. I appreciate you. I'm going to call it out here. You've definitely read the press release. Those numbers are straight from it, and it's probably worth saying that the 500,000 people that have used GridFinder have used it in its original guise, i.e., looking for leagues. Right? That's where we started. We started as a platform where you can go and find a community, and it's no secret that we're building and testing our league management service behind the scenes, and that's got far fewer people. 500,000 people have searched on the site, which is an incomprehensibly large number that doesn't really make any sense to me, but it's nuts. We've got about 6,000 people that are using it for the league management. We've had about 1,500 league managers go on and start using the manager, using the dashboards that we've created, build out their calendars, etc. And we've got a lot of work still to do on that. There's a few bits coming out soon which are very exciting. One, I mean, we're doing a Discord bot. That's not super exciting. It's not.
Standard.
It's totally required. So it's not like I'm giving away some kind of trade secret there. But our next release is a bit of a pivot. Well, not a pivot. It's an experiment. We're always trying to experiment. A good startup is a learning machine. That's what a good startup is. You're constantly learning, and in order to learn, you have to test and you have to push the boundaries and you have to see where the limits of your audience's attention spans are. And we think that one of the unique things about GridFinder is the breadth of roles and personas that we cater for. So it's not just for drivers. Actually, it's not a bad little tagline. Not just for drivers. We want to build a platform that's useful for.
There you go. Tom
We want
Bunten's just created his own strapline without the help of
not just
marketing.
for drivers. Well, it's not though, because if you think about it, sim racing is fantastic in the way that it's so inclusive, and by that I don't mean I'm just throwing around the word inclusive because that's what tech startups do because it ticks a box. I mean inclusive in the sense that you could not own a wheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you could never start on the grid, and yet you could be an integral part of a sim racing community. That could be because you're a steward, or it could be because you're a race manager, an event coordinator. It could be because you're a livery designer and you've designed half the liveries on the grid. It could be because you're fascinated by engineering setups and you create setups for people. It could be because you're a commentator and you want to commentate on the leagues, whether as a part of a bigger picture, or just because it's something fun that you want to do. You could be a broadcaster because you're fascinated by streaming and you just want to do the TV production in the background. You can do all of these things, never ever turn a lap, and still be an integral part of a sim racing community. And I think that's one of the things I love the most about it, and it's something that we're going to be really leaning into this year. We have a strategy to catch up, I think, when it comes to things like server management and result automations and blah 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 blah, all that sort of stuff. The where we're behind, there's competitors in the space who are much better at it than we are, and we don't hide that. But we have a strategy, a a partnership, let's say, coming on board this year, which will essentially kind of leapfrog that challenge. So we're trying to think laterally about how to kind of add value to the sim racing space. Um, but it's been, it's been a total learning experience. And actually, it's not just me, right? It's not just me. We're blessed to have a team of innovators, a team of people that are genuinely passionate about this community. And if I'm being honest, by this community, I mean the gaming community. Um, Something that we've differentiated ourselves with is our kind of hiring strategy. We don't look for sim racers in particular to hire, because the sim racing market it's immature in comparison to the wider gaming market. A lot of the games that you play, where millions of people play those games, the platforms, the third party apps that they have are well ahead of anything that we have in sim racing, and by a long way. And so Nikhil, for example, the CTO, co-founder at GridFinder, he's a huge gamer. He loves Rocket League and CS:GO. Like, he won tens of thousands of euros playing Rocket League when he was at university. He's like super good at Rocket League. I'm never going to play him. Camille, the same. He loves CS:GO and oh, hang on, I was going to say what? No, I don't mean World of Warcraft. RuneScape, right? Old school RuneScape. Like, he's obsessed with. He's made community tools on GitHub that have had tens of thousands of downloads, and still to this day, right? He likes building stuff for gamers. Liam is a huge CS fan and likes anime and watches. He's got all his favorite esports teams that he. What if I sit next to Liam in the office and he's always got a Twitch stream up on his second monitor whenever he's working. Mick is our social media exec, and he is a sim racer, F1 specifically, but he's got an Instagram account that he does called F1 Wow that's got like 120,000 followers or something. He just loves that social media um, world, and it's just it's gamers first, right? We're trying to learn the lessons that the gaming world have learned rather than the sim racing world, because the gaming world is so much further ahead. Like, why don't we look to the future? Why don't we look to the frontiers that sim racing hasn't even reached yet, rather
Mm.
than just iterating on what already exists in the world of sim racing? And I realize that that's kind of a hugely abstract way of trying to not give away what our big play is this year in terms of our um, growth strategy. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, also it's nice when we have these LAN events. Um, like, say, for instance, I think the first time that we caught up, apart from possibly Discord DMs, was at the Crowdstrike 24 Hours of Spa, where it's like this big melting pot of people
What a
within.
weekend, man!
I mean, well, what a tragic weekend as well on the Saturday.
Well, yeah,
But
yeah.
we won't go into that. But we look at the positive side of it, where we had Rory Alexander, we had George Morgan, Lewis McGlade, Ash Vandalay, Cam Roger, me, Paul Jeffrey, Steve Proudley, Mike Yao. It was like this huge melting pot of people that were
Mm,
involved within the sim racing community, and especially when everyone was gathering around the Fanatec arena for the SRO Esports GT Pro Series, which has always been part of the Fanatec GT World Challenge Europe, powered by AWS Endurance Cup. Just like, it's nice, it's sunny, it's late July in Spa, and everyone's just like saying, "Hey, how are you?" It's like, "Oh, you made
mm,
it." So it was really, really good, and I think LAN events always helps the sim racing community, like we have with the Sim Racing Expo every year, which is now confirmed at Dortmund until 2027. You've got Sim Formula Europe, run by Andy Massen, that's done over in the Netherlands every, in the winter time. I think LAN events are still a very good way for people to actually have a chance to have face to face conversations and actually be within the same space, rather than sort of like DMing someone and saying, "Look, have you got time for a call?" That's I think that's always going to be part and parcel of the community that we live in. It was so good to see so many of the manufacturers, like with Aztec, with Fanatec, with a lot of the Chinese now starting to bring hardware to market, like say Conspit, PXM. We also had Coffee Racer with their innovative coffee table stroke sim
mm.
rig, which was definitely had a queue outside their booth.
Yeah. Yeah, the Sim Racing Expo has been great. I remember being fortunate enough to go along with Race Department in 2021. It was me and Dan Terry from Sim Racing GP, and Steve Worrell now from Coach Dave, and Chris Hay, obviously fantastic YouTuber. The four of us in Steve's car driving from Milton Keynes across to Germany for the Sim Racing Expo was one of the most fun weekends I've ever had. And Steve introduced me to nearly everyone in sim racing that weekend, and it was absolutely fantastic. And having been back every year now, it's the highlight of our calendar. We're doing activations, and there'll be sponsorships, and there's going to be this year in particular. There's going to be a lot that GridFinder is going to be doing on the floor, which will be really exciting. But you're right. The benefit is meeting up with everyone, doing the Saturday night party and the Thursday before everyone else arrives, and getting together with the exhibitors, and just catching up with people, talking shop and talking not shop. And it's nice because it's the market is small, really small. I think this year marks a step change in sim racing hardware. I think there's a couple of hardware providers that have moved in, which I think will make waves. Obviously, Logitech and Thrustmaster have always been there, and they make the flight sim stuff and game pads, etc. So they're kind of big hitters in the gaming hardware world. But other than that, the other manufacturers we've had, even Fanatec, is relatively small in comparison to general gaming hardware manufacturers. And actually, this year we've had two notable entries into the sim racing market, where the gaming world at large has kind of seen sim racing and has moved on it. One is Cooler Master with their rig, and the second is Turtle Beach with their wheel, pedal, dashboard combination.
Yeah.
Those two entering the market this year, I think, is a real positive indication for sim racing in general, because I think now, rather than more niche companies serving our niche, we have huge global hardware manufacturers who are going to expose our niche to more people, which is great. It comes with growing pains. They'll be like with anything, right? When you're at school and you find a band that no one else knows, and you're like, oh my god, this is my band, they're so cool. And then the second they go onto Radio 1, you're like, no, they've changed, they're not the same anymore, they're on Radio 1 now, and they've sold out, they're not cool anymore, it's horrible, it's blah 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 blah. Like that reaction you will not get away from. And I imagine sim racing at some point will get to a stage. In fact, I already know a few people who are turning away from sim racing now because it's not the niche that they loved. But they will get to a point where sim racing will become that commonplace, and huge companies will move in on it, which ultimately will be good for sim racers, because prices will come down, quality will go up, the availability of various tournaments will increase, viewership of things will increase, which means sponsorship increase, which means prize money increases, which means the amount of tournaments that we can watch will increase. So all of this is good news for sim racing. But I think the 2021, 2022, 2023 sim racing after party crowd will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, with bigger names, bigger brands coming into it. So I'd like to think we'll never lose that kind of family feeling, which I do think we have. I think when you go to the Sim Racing Expo and you walk around the different booths, even though Acetec is competing with Fanatec, and Fanatec is competing with SimuCube, and they're all crossing over. Like the rig manufacturers are now bringing out wheels and pedals. Look at Track Racer. The wheel and pedal manufacturers are now bringing out rigs. Look at Acetec, right? So they're all taking as much of the market as they can. They're all going to have a full suite of products, and yet when you go to the pub afterwards, everyone gets on really well, because you all have that shared core passion of sim racing, and then it's all brought together by the glue, which is the community actors. And by that I mean like Random Coolstein, Lawrence de Souza, Gamer Muscle, like the personalities that everyone knows, that connects the brands to the sim racers. It's it's amazing. If you're listening to this and you've never been to the Sim Racing Expo, you've got to go and do it. It's like a pilgrimage that every sim racer has to make.
Considering it's probably going to be one of the biggest ones yet, because it's the 10th anniversary event of the Sim Racing Expo in 2024, which I'm Really, really pleased. And of course, the presenting team is staying as it was last year. So, Actual Vision, aka Luke Crane, Matt Brandt, me, and Nico Hilbrandt, we're all going to be there. I think, well, after the time that this goes live, or I will probably have done my first visit to Southwest Vision in Germany, because I've got a few days of meetings there anyway. So at least talking shop, but also catching up with Misha, Nadi, Danny, Marco, and everybody else. But I think, yeah, like you say, with the family glue that brings us all together for this shared love. It doesn't matter whether it's a hardware provider, it doesn't matter whether it's a software provider, or games are being displayed, or it's people that are behind the scenes that are really sort of making the exhibition work. You've got all the different, like, say, the ADAC. Uh, the first thing as you walked in, you see like all the electric courses that the ADAC use for like a talent cup, and then the first thing you see is the ADAC stand. I know quite a few of the people that work at the ADAC. I've got to know them over the last couple of years, including Ricardo, who did the live stream for the Digital GT 500 in 2022. And I remember that quite significantly because we had a very different, at that point, we had a different broadcaster, a different outfit that decided to do the production of the live streaming. And I think the way that in comparison with 2022, it's like 4 full-on days. So I was filming VTs, then having to rush over to the booth, which was separated from the main stage quite significantly. There was like a 15, 20-foot gap between where Luke and Matsu were on stage, and then there was me and Corby and Paul Glover, like, standing in a commentary box that was like so distant. And I I got asked for feedback, and I said, "Don't put the commentary box so far away from the main stage." And I think 2023, we saw a very, very more sort of family feel. And I remember, I think it was for the first race of the professional trophy on the Saturday, we had a packed house, like, literally. And then, of course, the Sim Sundays podcast, and then we had F1 Creator Series, which you guys are involved with as well. Taking the stage, and it was standing room only. And that,
Mm.
to me, was one of the biggest feelings. Like, me and Nico up there writing notes down for what's coming up and everything, and we were like, literally, oh my god, this is like awesome. Like 50, 60, 70 people standing, sitting and standing around the stage to hear what people have to say. I mean, let's talk about I know we haven't got much time, but let's have a quick talk about the Sim Sundays podcast fueled by Aztec
Mm.
Sim Sports.
Yeah.
What have been some of the highlights that you guys have had in terms of sort of like, you know, the guests? Like recently, I
Yeah.
mean, you've had Lucas Blakely, who gave a perfect personification of karting to sim racing, and Lucas has done some real life racing. I think Formula Ford last year, but also as a McLaren Shadow driver in
Yeah.
F1 Esports. I mean, you must have had some really, really sort of great guests on that show, including yours truly, of course.
Well, of course. Well, it goes without saying that that was the pinnacle of our repertoire. It's been hard to match, but no, it's been yeah, it's been really good fun. It's the easiest job I have, and again, it was an experiment, right? Just like everything we do at GridFinder is an experiment. But hosting that podcast is the easiest job I have because I can talk about sim racing
Mhm.
for hours. The challenge I have is not talking about it for hours and letting the guests talk for hours, but I'm interested in everything they have to say. So it's not too difficult. But in terms of what have been the highlights, it's a tough one. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind actually is it popped into my head as soon as you asked that question. I'm quite surprised that it did. Was Sim Racing Expo 2022. We hosted on stage a Sim Sundays episode, and it was with Dave Cam and Lawrence de Souza, and
Game of Muscle, I think,
we,
was on there as well, wasn't he?
pardon me,
I
Game of
think
Muscle.
I think Game of Muscle might have been. I'm not 100% sure who
Was
was
he?
on there.
I don't think he has ever been on the podcast because I message him on Discord regularly, abusing him because he's never come on the podcast. I could be if I'm wrong, I'm going to be really embarrassed.
No, 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 no. Don't worry. I'm actually going to have a look at the.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, so the concept was we wanted to lighten up the stage a bit. So the expo is great, we love it, but I think it's fair to say that the expo attracts, myself included, like the sweats, the sim racing sweats, those who absolutely love it. And there were all sorts of talks about coaching and tire models and new hardware coming out that had Newton meters this and peak torque that and all the rest of it and frequencies, and it was all very technical. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if we just got two personalities from the sim racing world and we just played a game? Totally unrelated to sim racing, but because they're sim racers, it will inevitably come up. So that's what we did. We played a game of Two Truths and a Lie with Dave Cam and Lawrence de Souza, and it was so much fun. It was so good. We just laughed, and it was about 45 minutes to an hour, and we just
Yeah,
messed around.
actually, I stand corrected. You were on one side, Chris was on the other, and it was Dave Cam and Lawrence de Souza
Yes,
in
that's
the
right.
middle. They were piggies in the middle on that one.
It was
So
it
I
was a
stand
lot of
corrected.
fun.
I stand corrected.
Well, yeah, because Gamer Muscle, if he's listening, you need to come on my goddamn podcast. I can't deal with this waiting anymore. He's playing hard to get. But anyway, yes, that was a lot of fun. Obviously, doing it on the stage, and then actually the year after, obviously we had the Creator Series on, which was great. You know, the four guys from the Creator Series was great, and Tom Brower included. We had Tom Brower for a whole separate episode. That guy is just full of personality. That was a really fun episode. But actually, one of my favorites was one that I recorded 2 days ago, which hasn't come out yet. It'll come out this Sunday, whatever that is, the 18th of Feb, with Darren Cox. And Darren Cox, as if you don't know the name Darren Cox, but you're listening to this podcast, or if you listen to the Sim Sundays podcast, I guarantee you know his work.
Yeah.
He was played by Orlando Bloom in the recent Gran Turismo film. So there you go. He was the founder of GT Academy, world's fastest gamer. Has gone on to do all sorts since. He ran the Mercedes and Aston Martin F1 esports teams. And that episode was meant to be 45 minutes and ended up being an hour and a half because he moved back his engagement because he was enjoying it so much. And we just spoke sim racing for an hour and a half, went through his whole life story, talked about entrepreneurship, talked about motorsport, talked about the influence of his dad growing up. It was absolutely fantastic. And you know, those stories are great. We try and talk about the human side of sim racing, the people behind it. Like, because sim racing is a weird world to be working in. If you go to the pub and you speak to 100 people in the pub and you say, "What do you work in?" Guarantee none of them will say sim racing. Very few will even say gaming, right? So it's a real niche to land in, and I'm always curious how people landed up there. You know, and then on the other side of the scale, we've had, you know, Thomas Jackemeyer and Matt Sten and Andre Eriksson. So that's, you know, that's Fanatec Track Racer, Asatec. We've had Hanu from SimuCube on. We've had all the big brands
I think
coming on. We've had
Addis, formerly of Kunos, formerly of Kunos now, folks. He has left after 15 years. So, you know what, Tom? On that note, I think we better close things up because this man has got a very, very busy schedule. Tom Bunten, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing what GridFinder comes up with in the coming weeks and months, folks. GridFinder social medias will be down in the description down below, and if I find any of Tom's, whether it be LinkedIn, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Instagram, they will be posted along with the episode with Darren Cox, the man behind GT Academy. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you for episode 60 coming soon. Goodbye.